Speaker number 2 is Professor Rogers Okot-Uma. Roger Wodolobo Okot-Uma is our son, actually, in the diaspora here in London. He holds a bachelor degree and a master degree in physics of Makerere University, Kampala in Uganda. He also has a doctorate degree in system engineering from Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. Okot-Uma is a chartered physicist of the Institute of Physics. He's also a fellow of the World Academy of Arts and Science and a member of several professional bodies in the computing industry. Dr. Okot-Uma was the recipient of a top professional, what we call the pedagogics in mathematics section, awarded by the International Association of Top Professionals in New York, United States, in the year 2017. He also has many decades of teaching at various universities in the Commonwealth, hence the title professor acquired from these universities. Dr. Okot Wodolobo Uma, our next speaker, number 2.
Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Okot-Uma, you can start your talk.
Okay, in a moment. Well, thank you very much. I'm pleased to be able to make a presentation at this DHSP Zoom forum. The topic of discussion for my presentation is basically attitudes among diaspora ethnic minorities towards COVID-19 vaccine. A short survey. I will begin with some context. Now, the last 1 year has witnessed countries worldwide face an unprecedented and rapid rise and spread of the novel coronavirus, COVID-19. As a result of that, pharmaceuticals worldwide were set in motion in a path to rapid development of vaccines as one primary agency to help control spread of the virus. When the vaccines started being available, there were momentums set into being for the grant of emergency authorizations for deployment of a number of vaccines to help control spread of COVID-19. Rapid development of COVID-19 vaccines has exacerbated the proliferation of mistrust and the public on variously variously expressed by individuals and groups or and groups in the social media. But this was received with a lot of cautious optimism, from cautious optimism to reckless pessimism, which began to accost public sentiments worldwide. The result was a trigger of a number of simple but important questions in the minds of potential vaccine recipients. For example, was the rapid development of vaccines as a result of exigencies of health concern, or as a result of politicization of the whole thing? How safe will the vaccine be? How long will immunity be in existence as time goes on? How safe would someone under conditions of sickness, how safe would this body react to existing sickness or new sickness? These became questions that prevailed in the minds of many. Now, information, digital information giving, as it were, quickly became rampant through mass and social media, which led to proliferation in many ways of misinformation, disinformation, and even conspiracy theories, as well as sentiments that turned out to be either unscientific or anti-scientific. The result was the proliferation of an apparent infodemic, meaning the excessive amount of information about a problem, i.e. COVID-19, that is typically unreliable, spreading rapidly, and making solution more difficult because of the unreliability. Now, emergency of vaccine hesitancy came into existence. And this meant that the public worldwide began to form opinions for reasons that prospective recipients of vaccines remained, for the most part, uninformed. They did not know what they needed to know to make the right decision to get vaccinations. Well, attitudes amongst diaspora ethnic minorities. The key word here is attitude, which is part of the affective domain in the acquisition of knowledge. In order to isolate these attitudes, one must aim to examine and understand psychological motivations that drive the attitudes pertinent to vaccine hesitancy, reasons why groups or individuals out there would in some way or other fall into a spectrum of those that are completely resistant to those that are have no problem in getting getting the vaccines. So from vaccine resistant clusters to vaccine acceptant clusters and adoptants. A standard methodology in trying to elicit these attitudes would be to mount a simple survey in a sample of the population of interest. In this case, the diaspora ethnic minorities. The questions tend normally to be simple and straightforward. For example, if a vaccine for COVID-19 were available, I would get it. Just answer yes or no. On the other hand, some of the questions that are pertinent would be likelihood questions involving the usual standard 5-point Likert scale, where one talks of most likely, less likely, and so on and so forth. But the most important ones is the third bit, where one may say, tick amongst options which best describes why you do not take a vaccine for COVID. You do not want to take a vaccine for COVID-19. Now, it's in this part of the questionnaire that one finds that the questions that are isolated would tend to be limited. In other words, most of the questionnaires would have directed questions, but one of the questions would be any other reason. That's where one would be able to tell some of the reasons that one may not have contemplated. The result is that some of the questions, some of the answers don't get isolated as such. Now, I had a look at two polls in recent times, the Royal Society for Public Health poll in December 2020 across different ethnic and socio-economic groups, which was able to come up with the conclusion that 3 in 4, about 76% of UK public would take COVID-19 vaccine if advised to do so by GP or health professional. Uptake was, however, significantly lower, about 57% for those in the ethnic minority groups, as compared to 79% in the white respondents. Now, a similar poll organized by Queen Mary University showed that 39% of the ethnic minority Londoners would say yes to vaccine, as compared to 70% of white Londoners. In both the two polls, one finds that vaccine hesitancy is much higher in the minority ethnic groupings than the whites as such. Now, I was then faced with the question of trying to find out more of what lies behind the reasons why individuals or groups within the ethnic minorities would tend to say no to vaccine. Now, what I did was to seek to explore these other reasons by seeking to carry out brief pointed voice conversations with a small random sample of members of the Ugandan diaspora ethnic minority in the UK during actually the last 5 days. Now, the findings, I was able to find pertinent vaccine resistant clusters. General fear of the unknown was one of the most important factors. Then there were specific fears of loss of vitality, of virility and fertility. And then specific fears of being implanted with something. So this is coming from conspiracy theories around. Findings too pertinent to vaccine acceptant clusters. These are groups that were not encumbered by any of the uncertainties associated with vaccines. Now, under the general fear, this was out of the dread of the unknown or only partially known effects of effects of COVID-19 vaccine. For example, the respondents were saying, will the vaccine cause me, for example, paralysis? I don't know. Will the vaccine not cause death in a sick or even healthy person? I have no idea. What will happen to my body immunity? Will it cause me some allergic reactions, for example? To date, it's a truism that most, if not all, the non-COVID-19 vaccines are reactogenic. In other words, many of them, depending on who the recipients are, trigger a range of transient side effects in a lot of the recipients. There were specific fears of loss of vitality and virality and infertility. These were associated predominantly, views held predominantly by relatively younger generations, the male and female folks alike. Vitality, virility, infertility was deemed primal to the survival of families and even the whole species, as it were. But when I tried to find out more, they said I was able to come up with the conclusion that much of the thinking along these lines were partly fueled by social media messaging on specific COVID-19 vaccine, on warning of infertility, coming directly, well, one of the recipients actually sent me what modified or was able to influence him to think that way. And the social media write-up was that it is unknown whether COVID-19 mRNA BN162b2 has it is unknown whether COVID-19 messenger RNA has impact on fertility. Now, that leaves open as to whether fertility is not affected or is affected. COVID-19 vaccine messaging of this type can be lost in translation for the reason that whoever has the concern is able to say, well, the impact is unknown or can be either way. So these were some of the influences towards thinking that way. Then there were specific fears of being implanted with something, and this pertains to the nanochip conspiracy, which is baseless, which tend to be baseless dystopian claims grounded on the conspiracy that some vaccines incorporate nanochip technologies, which are deemed to enable recipients to be electronically tracked by Big Brother. The nanochip technology conspiracy theory is a sequel of an equally baseless dystopian claim that 5G mobile technology was the source of Corona-19 virus. Believe it or not, some of these conspiracy theories was influential in the thinking of whether to take vaccine or not. In fact, the 3 concerned acquaintances and relatives sought assurance from me about the veracity of, or otherwise, of 5G or nanochip technology in relation to COVID-19 virus vaccine. Of course, I was able to debunk that and to enable them to have a peaceful mind. Now, a cluster of individuals and groups remained unencumbered by conspiracy theories, anti-science sentimentalism, or even dystopian science fiction. Now, these were the vaccine acceptant clusters on the other side of the spectrum. For the most part, they were autonomous in their thinking, displaying less emotion in the main on and basing their thinking on informed discussion grounded on proclamations attributed to science and the scientific method. A proportion of vaccine acceptance have remained curious, though, of wanting to know the basis of the technologically different types of COVID-19 vaccines. In case any of the inherent pertinent technologies would impinge on their body's genetic structure or religious faith. In other words, they were curious to know, for example, what is the fundamental makeup of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine as compared to the viral vector-based vaccine, the Oxford AstraZeneca type. Again, some of the worries came from the mass media, in that of course the messenger mRNA is used in the development of vaccines, is a new technology. So even those who had the minds of vaccine acceptance still had doubts as to whether all was well. Questions lingering around international travel were possible requirements for COVID-19 vaccination certificate, where was one of the things, one of the elements again that the vaccine acceptance took into consideration. Will it become mandatory to have COVID-19 testing or vaccination certificate? Will COVID-19 vaccination become mandatory to go to work? Well, I can confirm that two of the respondents in my voice calls with a section of the Ugandan diaspora ethnic minority confirmed their intention to get vaccinated solely to avoid being encumbered at points of departure and destination when undertaking international air travel. In fact, one of them was on the point of preparing to go home, said he didn't want to be troubled right at departure and at the end of the journey as such. Now, right. Now, just one moment. Okay. Yes. Now, as a result of this, one begins to think as to what may be done in order to advance any change in attitude in one way or other. Now, the last mile, as it were, for COVID-19 vaccines is to provide all those who are especially reluctant and unlikely to participate with all the necessary evidence-based information for individual decision-making. That is not to say one is trying to persuade or otherwise, but it's probably a platitude to state that taking a vaccine is one element, one of personal choice. It is a confidence mark of paradigm shift in one's suite of attitudes. It's something personal, but it is important that all the information needed to make decisions ought to be there. Now, a mandatory vaccination policy could, from democratic governance purview, lead either way, could cause vaccine acceptant people to become vaccine resistant and vaccine resistant to become vaccine acceptant. Now, in other words, trying to make vaccination of the public mandatory may not be the best option for the best option at all. However, early experience to exposure, to seeing age mates getting vaccinated with no real encumbrances, in the immediate or short term in the post-vaccination period could be a favorable factor for building confidence in individual vaccine uptake. The last 5 days, as I said, when having discussions with a number of people, some of the questions that I was told was, so and so, who is an age mate of mine, went for vaccination 2 weeks ago. I've watched her come back, have a few of the attendant factors like fever and so on, but nothing more. So I didn't want to go myself, but this time I'm deciding that I will go. I'm convinced that I should be able to go. What this means is simply early experience to exposure to seeing somebody going and coming back without any problems helps a great deal. Now, on the other hand, possible psychological dimensions of vaccine messaging for attitude change might help. Messages that focus on safety and efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines across all groups, regardless of the likelihood of getting vaccinated, would be able to obviate, as it were, the sense of anxiety that linger around vaccines and vaccination, i.e., efficacy and safety, because that is psychologically important. On the other hand, one could also think of creating momentum around vaccines and vaccination as normal behavior that is consistent with part of normal health routines in past actions and other present actions. This helps in the sense that one is trying to rationalize the observation that vaccination for COVID-19 virus need not be treated as something out of the blue. It is as good as vaccination, the type of vaccinations that people in various groups have had in the past. Then building positive social identities that play to moral obligation to help ethnic groups to perceive vaccination as their personal choice. One reiterates the fact that personal choice is important to weave a sense of autonomy into a wider pro-social community and or society where it is recognized that they have a choice. The important thing here is that whatever information that is made available to individuals and groups is to help them make a personal choice. And then enabling development of confidence in decision-making amongst those with low likelihood to take up COVID-19 vaccination by conditioning them to trust information sources that are evidence-based and grounded in science and the scientific method, while emphasizing personal agency to vaccine uptake. This complements most of what I have already I have already said before. Now, as recent as just a few weeks ago, World Economic Forum came up with some perspectives in terms of 3 main stages or phases that can be envisaged to make vaccination amongst various groups much more effective or efficient. Now, in phase 1, which World Economic Forum calls demand over supply, the questions that arise are how to manage early availability of vaccines as demand escalates, and focusing on the vulnerable and most critical in the support of healthcare as key to keeping the public on the side of vaccination. And then, of course, activating the hesitant. These are the phase 2 really relates again to groups that have tended to be vaccine hesitant in the course of the last 1 year or so, or in the course of the last 2 months when vaccines became available. But the most important thing is wider opportunity following demonstrable early success at vaccination would aim at bringing the reasonable reluctant on the side with vaccination. Then reaching herd immunity, well, reaching herd immunity or sustaining some behavior, this one apparently is a function of the production factor R0, one that periodically one talks about when the usual briefs are carried out with on telly every Thursday or so. Now it's R0, the production factor, is an important factor in the mathematical model of COVID-19 spread. Now, when vaccine is considered, when vaccine is taken into consideration, efficacy is incorporated. One actually finds out that the better the efficacy, the more would be the percentage, sorry, the less would be required to have herd immunity by vaccination of the public. On the other hand, for lower efficacy, it would require a larger percentage in order for herd immunity to be ascertained. So this one is important in the sense that making use of more than of more than one vaccine, for example, Pfizer and AstraZeneca, would mean that if one of them has a lower efficacy and the other one has a higher efficacy, the two would work in such a way that the percentage to obtain herd efficacy would not be too difficult as such. Now, as a last word, I will say something with regard to my own experience. In the beginning, I was totally vaccine hesitant for reasons of unanswered questions inherent in most of the known COVID-19 vaccines to date. This is apparently not with understanding my highly scientific background and not with understanding my ability to be able to actually model the spread of COVID-19 with mathematical ease, and in recent months incorporating vaccine efficacy in the model. The final decision, however, was purely a personal choice, grounded on the suite of scientific information. When this came, I went for my first dose with gratitude, tossing off the apparent pains of inaction, but mainly because I was able to eventually make a personal choice based on all the relevant information that I could get. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Rogers Uma.